Great to be at the GOTO event again, even though if it's not in person. What am I working on? I have been at Google as an SRE for roughly 6 years, and I have been in many different areas, in ads, in developer tools, cloud products. But now I'm working on more of a horizontal role where we look at things that all SRE teams have to deal with. And that is mainly how they interact with their development partners and how to make that better. This includes many different things like change management or launch reviews. But I want to talk about something more fundamental today, and that is the engagement model underneath how SREs and developers work together. Okay, a little bit of background. You all have probably heard about a company named Google, and you might be aware that it's pretty big. But how big it is, not only in terms of compute power, traffic, network storage, but actually in terms of software complexity, can be pretty mind-blowing. We published a paper a few years ago about the monorepository where the vast majority of Google's production code resides. And already back then, it had over 2 billion lines of code. That's much, much bigger than what most other companies have. And with that complexity, a lot of challenges arise because a lot of this code interacts with each other in various ways. And even if it's like a clean design at the local scale, if you just like plug many, many of these services together, it can become very hard to manage. So how do you deal with that? How do you run such a planet scale system? Well, first of all, the question is, what do you focus on? Do you focus on keep adding features on the velocity, or do you focus on the reliability? The job title might give it away, site reliability engineer. We focus on the reliability aspects. But not only. It is the most fundamental thing. If your service doesn't work, nobody cares if it has received a new feature because it doesn't work. Nobody is going to be able to use that feature. But if your service is like, has an uptime of 99.9999999%, but the UI still looks like in the 90s, nobody is going to be interested either. So how do we deal with that? We actually have 4 main goals in our mission. First and foremost, it's reliability, but reliability up to an availability level that the user actually needs. If our users are happy with 99.9 or 99.99% 4 nines, then that is what we aim for. And we don't aim for 5, 6, 7 nines if we don't have to, because that comes at a cost. It comes at a cost in terms of resources, time, engineering, machines, but also at a cost for velocity. How many features you can build, how quickly you can build new features, and how easy it is to maintain that system. So this is what we actually maximize for once we have reached our reliability goals, to make the life of our developers easier to deliver great features to our users. And there are 2 ways how you can do that. You can do that by building great systems that are robust, that are easy to manage, that are easy to extend, or by throwing people into the grinder, like building a big support team that like pushes buttons to keep the system up around the clock. We prefer to use software instead of human toil because that's A, more cost efficient in the long term, and B, it's also much more fun. I don't want to be a button pushing person that like deals with fires day in, day out. And then there's also efficiency. We need to be mindful about the resources we use. You can also fix a lot of problems by throwing money at it. And sometimes that's the right answer, but it's not always the right answer. And sometimes you can build systems much more efficiently and you can reap big benefits by just taking a second look. Sometimes that's machine resources, sometimes it's engineering time. So these are the core principles. SRE is a specific specialist role at Google that takes care of these, because this is nothing that you can do on the side. Every developer takes a training once per year and then they know all about how to do this. It's a full-time job. And this sounds a lot like DevOps, you might say, and it's true. It has a lot in common with DevOps. It's not called DevOps for a very simple reason. Google has been doing that since 2003 when nobody else was talking about something like DevOps. And Ben Traynor-Sloss, who actually founded SRE back then and is still our VP, said SRE is what happens when you ask a software engineer to design and run operations. So the software engineering mindset is key to achieve these goals that we laid out in our mission. And it's not that everyone on the team is a software engineer, and definitely not a pure software engineer. We draw from many different backgrounds. A lot of great SREs come from sysadmin backgrounds and very diverse backgrounds. And it's super important. We need all of that knowledge. But we together, from all of our different backgrounds, we approach this problem as a software engineering problem, as a software problem that you solve with a principled approach with algorithms, and not just by becoming very well trained in pushing buttons. Now, there is something that is different in SRE from most other DevOps approaches, and that is we are a separate organization inside of Google. There is an SRE reporting hierarchy. We typically group the different parts of SRE around product areas, or PAs for short. And they have different teams that are then often split across continents to provide better on-call coverage around the clock. And they partner with the developer teams. So we are not embedded in the developer teams or the developer organization. We are a separate organization. And that is for a reason. The reason is that reliability is something that can easily be forgotten. If you have a big launch coming up, then of course you will do this later. Similar to software testing, of course, we will test the software after we have released it. And then after the launch is the next launch and the next launch. And then you realize that you have neglected reliability when it's too late. So here, SRE is a separate organization that has this as an agenda, that is working on that, and it's building also the horizontal knowledge, exchanging ideas from different parts of Google on how to be better at this. And the SRE engagement model is actually about these little dotted red lines, about the peer relationship between the dev organization and the SRE organization, because what this is not supposed to be is an ops team with a fancy name. It's something entirely different, and the interaction between dev and SRE is entirely different than what we traditionally know about the interaction between dev and ops. And you should not confuse the one with the other. Okay, so what is this SRE engagement model? It is a set of principles and a set of tools of engagement types. I'll talk first about the principles, and then later I will give you an overview of the engagement types that we at Google use. I hope you can take away from these ideas for the area that we are working in, but every company is different. Every company has a different culture, different challenges. So try to apply these ideas to your environment as applicable, and it might be slightly different from what we do, and it doesn't mean it's worse or you should follow this as a dogma. There are lots of great ideas out there, and you need to have the right idea for the problem. So one thing that might be surprising is that SRE support is nothing automatic. Not every dev team, not every product at Google gets SRE support. Actually, a surprising number of them don't. Because the dev teams have to actually pay for SRE support, and they pay by giving headcount to the SRE team and say, how much would it cost if you work on this particular service? And the important part here is that it's strategic. The idea is not to have something transactional where you say, like, we have this project for half a year, I'm going to fund 2 of your people, and then we're going to take that headcount away. But it's about, like, we are going to build a whole SRE team for the next 2 years for this set of services. And then within that, you can still move headcount around, but the headcount is owned by SRE. SRE has the authority over that headcount and decides how to use it best. And it's not the throw it over the wall mentality. It's an ops problem now. Dev has like given that thing to SRE, so they have to figure out how to fix it. The service is still owned by the dev team, and it will always be. And especially the reliability is owned by the dev team. They are accountable for it, and SRE is there to help with that. And then finally, it is a partnership where both sides have to agree. It's not like the dev team says, here, you have to take the pager for this. You are on call for it now. But only when both dev and SRE agree that's the right time to do that, to onboard that service into SRE, it's happening. And similarly, both have to agree that it's still the right thing. And if either SRE or dev decides that no, this is not working out for us, they can stop that. Either SRE can hand back the pager, or the dev team can say, like, we want our headcount back. Both have happened. It's typically not what we aim for. Typically, all of these things agree, and sometimes it's that both sides agree, like, the service no longer needs SRE support because either it's working well enough or there are other things that need more attention and we need to apply SRE expertise over there. Now, excuse me, what should SRE actually work on? Well, first of all, it obviously has to align with SRE's mission: reliability, velocity, maintainability, efficiency, the things that I already mentioned. But it also needs to have something with a clear value proposition. That means that actually this is something that SRE can do better than dev. It's not something where we just like do a little training, then the dev team knows how to do it, and off we go. That is much easier. It is less coordination. The dev team has more autonomy, and they save headcount they can use for other things. Often enough, there are areas where you need many years of experience and dedicated headcount to work on these problems, and that is where SRE is actually helping. And it's definitely not, oh, SRE is so much better at handling big incidents. You have like better night coverage with the pager because you also have a team in Europe. That is not an argument that's going to go well with the SRE team. We do ops as a means to an end. We do ops to understand the system better, to learn how to prevent such outages in the future, not because we enjoy getting paged at any time of the day. Also, the goal is not to move the ops workload around. The actual goal is to reduce it. There's often, if you have some experience with it, a lot of opportunity to actually make things easier, to remove button clicking for release processes, to have better tests in place that your releases don't go wrong as often, to have a different system architecture that is more resilient against cluster outages and lots of other things that can actually reduce ops to a level that is manageable by the dev team, or that is also understandable by the dev team because it's less crazy to handle. And then I also said it should be impactful work. It should be where SRE really brings value. And how can SRE do that? First of all, you can only do this together with the dev team. If you try to do this by yourself or against the dev team, not going to be successful. And similarly, the dev team must help you and must be also interested in improving reliability. If the dev team is just thinking they can offload this problem so they don't have to think about it anymore, it's not going to work. And you need to set clear goals. You need to really have an understanding of what are you trying to get out of this. How are you going to make this service better? And what is the roadmap for that? And the roadmap, again, should be shared between both sides. And then you regularly checkpoint and review and see, like, is this actually working? Are we making progress? And you need to adjust your plans. Again, if you just think naming this team SRE and like handing the service to them and it's going to make things better, it's not going to work. You actually have to be very conscious about where you invest your work. And then one great way to measure success are service level objectives, SLOs. Having a very clearly defined metric on, like, is the service healthy or not, is super important to measure success, because you want to really improve the situation for your users. And often you see outages where, like, yeah, the SLO was good, but the users were still suffering, so we're going to ignore the SLO from now on. It's not the right answer. What you need to do is actually fix your SLO to be more aligned with the user expectations. If your user's unhappy, so should be your SLO. And the SLO is not something static. The SLO is something that you improve as you learn about what your users actually need. And then you need to also change course when you're making progress, as well as when you're not. You need to review, like, how do you invest your SRE funding, and does it still make sense? Should you reassign SREs from one service to another, from one focus area to another? Or maybe you don't even need as many SREs anymore, or maybe you need more SREs. And then this typically are long-term conversations at the leadership level, at the PA level, on, like, how to develop the organizations. But like investing 10 headcount of SRE for this, like, super critical system today, and then 10 years later, there's still 10 SREs on that, but nobody really cares about that system anymore because it has been working fine for years. Or the SREs have become lazy with, like, they found a niche where it's working for them. And they will always find projects, but are these still the right projects for the company? And you have to be very thoughtful about that. The idea is not to fire people, because SRE is always in demand. You will always find impactful work. Just make sure you have picked the most impactful one. And clear scope is another thing in that area, to see really, like, what is the thing that we actually want to work on. As I said, there's always more work to be done than you can do. So a big mistake is trying to boil the ocean. Focus on a specific problem, a specific service, a specific aspect. Say your CI/CD pipeline is broken, or the CI/CD landscape is very heterogeneous across the company. This is a clear scope. This is something you can work on. You work on this service today and this other service not yet, maybe later once that service is fixed, so you can actually make meaningful progress. And that progress has to be in the context of the user. If the user is not getting anything out of them, either in terms of reliability or in terms of feature velocity or in terms of cheaper cost, you're doing it wrong. There are some areas where the connection is really hard to see. One of them is convergence. I think it's a super important topic, but the user will not directly benefit from you consolidating all of your production on the same platform. At least not in the short term. It's an awful lot of work. It has risks. It can, like, break production in many interesting ways. But in the long term, it pays off a lot because simplicity is key to be able to scale, to be able to do more, to add more features, to be reliable. And heterogeneity of your landscape is accidental complexity. This has nothing to do with your product, but it makes the life of your engineers harder, both on the SRE side and on the development side. And then finally, you should not try to be a human abstraction layer for production. This is a great feeling. You know so many things, and the developers will be so grateful for everything you have to say because they don't know. But the actual idea is that they learn about these things so they can do this better, and they don't need you as much anymore because you're also needed elsewhere. And I think the biggest problem here is that when you put yourself in that position, there is no real reason to make things simpler because you understand them and your developers don't need to. But when your developers need to understand these things, you have to make them simple because they have so many other things that they need to take care of. They can't do this as full-time as you do. So something we have observed a lot in like very long time SRE teams that like focus on a single product is that they build very elaborate custom setups that work well for them, but nobody else can understand. Okay, those are the key principles. As I said, they might vary for your organization, but hopefully they are somewhat useful to you. So let me spend some time on the different engagement types. Traditionally, people think there is either binary SRE support or there is no SRE support. It's not that simple. There are many different shades of gray on how to get SRE support. And actually, the less heavy you make SRE support, the easier it is to put it earlier in the life cycle of the product. And I think that is absolutely critical. We need a shift left strategy where the SRE support happens early in the process. Not like after you launch the product and it's already seeing user traffic, and then changing that is very, very hard. But early on during the implementation phase, during the design phase, you can provide some input, very little, give some feedback, and make it a lot easier for the developers to build systems right from the beginning, so you don't have to fix them later. And often enough, it's impossible to fix systems later on. You actually have to completely replace them. And most organizations neither have the time nor the resources to do that. And then you're stuck with a terrible system that's going to give you and your users a lot of headache. Okay, we have 3 different types of engagements. These are broad buckets. There are different ways to do that. They just like highlight different approaches. The first of them is baseline. This is basically you work with your whole developer organization, and every single team in that area has access to the baseline support. It's ad hoc. It doesn't count any significant amount of engineering time, so there's no headcount payment involved. And it's like little things that can have a big impact. For example, many SRE teams offer office hours where devs can sign up and go there to get some kind of feedback, get questions answered, get some help with some project, or like just ask someone who's the expert in the area, who should I talk to about this problem. And also consulting projects where the dev teams can apply for with a specific need and say like, We need new monitoring for this system, and we're going to build that new monitoring, but we have absolutely no idea how to build good monitoring. Can you maybe help us? And then one SRE works with the dev team, understands how the system is working and what their needs are and what their problems are, and then gives them advice on how to build a good monitoring system, reviews their designs and all of that. There might be some kind of hand-on work involved, but the bulk of the work will come from the dev team, but SRE contributes the expertise. And then on a more tactical level, when the dev team is on call and the system is on fire, they might be the most knowledgeable about this particular system, but they might not have all of the production context, all of the production skills. So we often have an incident response team that they can escalate to and say, what should we do? We're stuck. The system has been on fire for 2 hours and we don't know what to do. Can you help us? And then SRE works with the dev team on figuring out how to fix that particular system. And sometimes it's just like organizational things that SRE can do, like helping with the communication, informing other impacted systems or customers about these problems to give the development team more time to focus on the debugging. The second and intermediate level for support is assisted engagement. At this point, we have a longer-term relationship between the SRE team and this particular dev team. You typically have a dedicated point of contact in the SRE team that works with the dev team, joins some of their meetings, and you build a shared roadmap between them. But the majority of projects that you execute are still driven by the dev team or jointly between SRE and dev. And also the production responsibility resides with the dev team. There might be cases where SREs participate in the on-call for that system, like they join the on-call rotation of the dev team, or they take a few hours per day just to get a deeper understanding of the service to make better recommendations. But day-to-day, this responsibility still is with the dev team. And I think this is a very powerful type of engagement because you have a lot of bandwidth to apply to the system, and you can do this also very early in the life cycle of a system during the design and implementation phase or during a limited launch before you allow the whole public in. So in these phases of development, you can still do a lot of adjustments that will be hard or impossible later on. So SRE can participate in designing the system, maybe implementing parts of the system, and overall help the developers to get the production side of things right from the beginning. But it can also work later in the life cycle when you might not have a system that is ready for SRE support, either because it doesn't have the business criticality to require as much headcount on the SRE side, or because the system is actually not in a state that SRE would be willing to be on call for it. But then they can work with the dev team to improve the situation for them. And then finally, there is the classic model, the full support, where SRE is on call for the service typically. Often we require the development teams to have some part in the on-call responsibilities, either as an escalation rotation for SRE, so reversing the model compared to the previous engagement types, or by like taking a few hours every week or particular tasks, so they stay on top with how production works and understand it better, which will help them developing better software. This is obviously the most costly type of support. And not only in terms of headcount, it also comes at a cost in terms of alignment and coordination, because SRE has the authority over production. The devs have to talk to SRE before doing major changes. And they are also still required to put in a lot of project work to improve the reliability, because only when the system is reasonably healthy, SRE can continue to be on call for it in the long term. If a service is very unhealthy, this impacts the SRE team a lot, and the SRE team is typically on call for a number of services. And then these other services are also negatively impacted. So when there are issues, everyone is expected to help improving the service and making it compliant with the highest levels of production excellence, especially things like convergence, because again, when the SRE team is on call for 5 different services and every single service works differently, they cannot be really an expert in all of these different production systems, production processes. So having less different processes, less tools, less heterogeneity really helps with the mental cost of being on call for that service. That's about it. Thank you very much for listening. I hope this was helpful for you. If you are interested in learning more about how Google does SRE, we have published 3 books. Site Reliability Engineering, Site Reliability Workbook. They cover similar aspects, but from different perspectives, and Building Secure and Reliable Systems, which also brings the security aspects in that are very related. So, thank you very much.